Forget frequently asked questions,
common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. A returning guest, Ken McCarthy. I've known Ken for a number of years. He's been involved in direct marketing for, I would guess, probably about 30 years. I put on a series of system seminars where he had great speakers that would talk about all aspects of marketing. And Ken is always looking for what's the latest and the greatest. So he was a very early person in direct marketing, opt-in forms on the internet, video marketing, texting, etc. I was recently listening to one of his audios that he gives to his system club group, of which I'm a member, and he mentioned a book called Monetization that talks about funnels. The author's name is Caleb O'Dowd. Fantastic book. I've been going through it, and even though I've been in direct marketing for 15 years, there's still a ton in there that I need to learn and implement to get even better. And I had heard Ken a number of months ago, maybe a year ago, speaking to Dan Kennedy. He was also a grand old wizard of marketing. And they had talked about a phenomenon that we're going to discuss today. So what they had said approximately is when you're marketing to an industry and you have a new offer, what you'll get typically, I guess, will be the hyper responsives, the lowest hanging fruit to accept that offer. And a lot of times that's duped me and other people in thinking, oh, wow, this is going to be a great offer. I want to scale it up and make all this money. And then when you do that, that doesn't happen. So I remember him and Dan, I'm not going to give too much of a spoiler, they were talking about the different tranches of people that are in any market. So that's what I wanted to discuss today. So thanks for coming again, Ken, and welcome back.
Great. Thanks a lot. And actually, I've been making my living at direct response for 40 years. And I'd been doing it for really literally another 10 years before that. So it's 50 years.
Wow. That's amazing.
Believe me.
Yeah. Tell me a bit about when and how did you notice this phenomena that markets are stratified and that, what you see at first doesn't necessarily reflect the amount of effort that's going to be needed later to market to that group?
Well, it's just a matter of doing this a lot and talking with lots of people too. So you have your own experience and you have the experience of your colleagues. And of course you read, you just try to absorb as much information as you can. And you just see this pattern coming up over and over again. Now it's different for different industries, of course, but there, for instance, if I'm a plumber, that's a different kind of business, and there are other kinds of businesses that don't have that kind of a dynamic, but there are plenty of businesses that do. If you're selling products, if you're selling services, hopefully you start out thinking very carefully about your market, because your product doesn't, I don't want to say your product doesn't matter, because that sounds cynical. Your product does matter, and it matters a lot. It should be a good product, but it's kind of like a sailboat in the wind. You could have the world's most beautiful sailboat, just designed perfectly, the best sails, the best sailors, and all that. If there's no wind blowing, there's no hope. So the market is your wind. So, you need the boat, obviously, otherwise you're going to be treading water, but you have to have the wind. And there's a whole lot you can know about the wind before you get started. So my advice for a very long time has been, don't be a marketer, be an expert on markets, on specific markets. And so anyway, when you've seen a lot of promotions, you know that things tend to flame out after a while. It's pretty rare, again, unless you're the plumber or some other kind of business that doesn't go away and has an endless stream of new demand. If you're selling something other than that, things more often than not flame out. And so
it's not that you're running out of people to market to. It's just, I guess you're running out of the people that have the capability or the will to respond. Like, what do you attribute it to?
Let's look at this, right? So you're very unlikely to be. Well, I mean, but even companies like, Facebook, at a certain point, they've reached everybody. So where is their growth going to come from? The numbers and the mathematics really, really changes for everyone, even for Apple. But none of us are going to be, doing business on that level. None of us are going to have products that the whole world uses. We are by necessity, and it's not a bad thing, we are by necessity niche marketers. We're looking for a small, well-defined market that has very specific needs that we uniquely can provide. So take your full pool of everybody who's a potential buyer. And a potential buyer just means they're alive and they're in the field and they even have money, right? So that's whatever. So that's your number that you're starting with. The way this typically works out, and it's kind of a rule of thumb, but it's highly reliable, is there's different, and I love this word from Wall Street, tranches, right? There's different segments of your market. The first segment is your hyper-responsives. Your second segment is your responsives. Your third market is buyers, general, normal buyers. And then the fourth part is the sludge. And so here's how to think about it. In every market of any size, there's always going to be an avant-garde. There's always going to be the people at the cutting edge who are just into it. If a new product comes out, they're just going to buy it. Period. End of story. All you really need is a pulse because they're into it. They're buyers. Like I'm following a topic that I'm really interested in right now. And I didn't buy one book on it. I bought 8 different books on it. And I didn't buy just the current books. I went out and also bought, like a VHS from 1984.
Wow.
You're right. So I'm into this particular topic. So if you put something even remotely credible in front of me that has a pulse, I'm going to buy it. That's a hyper-responsive. So that's, roughly 3 to 5% of your marketplace.
Oh, wow. Low number.
It's a low number, but yeah, it's very low. The next slice of your market are the responsive people. So they're alive, they're interested, they're ambitious, they are responsive, but they take a little bit of massaging. You're not going to, you can't throw a softball at them and think you're going to win. You probably can't get them on the first try. The hyper responses will literally buy on the first go. They hear about it, they buy it, done. Right? The responsives, they're ready to spend money and got money to spend, but they need a pretty good pitch and they might need to see it a couple of times before they decide they're going to buy, right? That's anywhere from 15 to 20% of your market. If you're lucky, it might be as little as 10 to 15%.
Is there any way you can identify, before we go on for the percentages, or we could leave it so after?
You know how you identify them? You run your ads. You run your ads and the first people that show up are your hyper responsives.
Right, but the other levels, like how do you identify through your marketing? Can you get hints of who it is that is engaging with your marketing in particular based on their behavior?
Well, the only behavior, there's all kinds of ways you can slice and dice this. For example, if there were a way, and there are some ways, to know who is currently going to automobile, new car review sites, looking at videos about various new cars, looking at the Kelly book and all this kind of stuff. If you can find people that are doing that, they are a very good candidate based on their behavior, for pitching them on coming to your car dealership and looking at cars. And even better, if you know they're a BMW owner and you're a BMW dealer, that's just a pitch made for heaven. Now, most of us don't have that level of market surveillance, but yeah, if you're talking about behavior, that would be a behavioral way to target your marketing. But the simplest way, and I'm into simple. I really love simple. The less moving parts, the better. The less I have to think, the better. I have to do plenty of thinking just to get through the day as it is. So I try to streamline as much as possible. So if you want to know who your hyper responsives are, put an ad in front of the marketplace, and the first group of people that show up are by definition your hyper responsives.
Okay,
that's the behavior.
And what would the responsives look like then? The
responsives,
3-step campaign.
The responses of the people that aren't going to buy with. Hyper responsives will sometimes buy with just an announcement. Who's that singer, Taylor Swift or whatever? Now she has a big pocket of hyper responsives, but they're hyper responsive. So all she has to do is announce that she's going to be in Dubuque, Iowa, and that's all they need to hear. They don't need a sales pitch. They don't need a sales letter. They don't need anything. They're there, So hyper-responsives act that way. If they're a golfer and they hear there's a new golf ball that gives you an extra 30 yards on your swing and nobody can identify it. If they're hyper-responsive, they're just going to get a box and see. The responsive people, they will respond to, some massaging, sequence, a good sales pitch, a good offer, all that kind of stuff. But pretty quickly, after you sort of cream the top 20%, let's say, between responsive and hyper responsive, and it could be even smaller, but it's small. Now you get into the regular consumer in that particular market. And they require a lot of work, a lot of impressions, a lot of education, and all that stuff is expensive.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
How much is a lot? Is it like 3 times as much as the responsives or 10 times as much? Any rule of thumb?
It's one of these things that you find out. You start a sequence, if you're lucky enough to get one of these folks to opt in, you start a sequence and you find out, wow, it takes 10 messages and 3 videos watched for someone to buy this thing. That if you're asking about behavior, in every case, you'll find out what the behavior is by, dangling your lure out there and seeing how they bite. What does it take? How many lures do you have to put out there before they'll bite on one?
And so what percentage of the market do you think this is? You said hyper responsive 3 to 5, responsive.
I'm going to say
15 maybe,
just to be safe. So you got 20% that are pretty responsive, and you have the next 30 or 40% that are regular consumers. They have to hear about you a lot. They have to see you a lot. This is a case where I can't think of the technical term of it. I'm blanking out. But when somebody sees your ad and they've seen your ad, let's say on YouTube, and then you start following them with
retargeting them.
Retargeting. This is the retargeting crew. They'll see it. Well, here's how it goes. The first time they won't even see it. The second time they'll kind of notice it, but not even know what they saw. The third time they'll realize it's an ad. The fourth time they'll start paying attention to it. The 5th time they'll listen to it. The 6th time they'll study it. I mean, I'm just sort of showing. I don't know how many, but this is the process that normal customers go through. Now the nighttime they're sitting down and actually contemplating, okay, is this thing worth putting money into? And then what you have to understand is the remaining part of your market. And people get deluded. They think, well, there's 10,000 pastry chefs in the world. They're all going to want my pastry chef, make $1 million with pastry chef wisdom course, right?
Yeah.
No, not how it is. Number one, the first thing you have to do right away, since you're dealing in the direct response via the internet, or even direct mail, or even, infomercials, direct response radio, whatever, you have to immediately, before you even think about responsive, hyper responsive, blah, 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 any of those people, you immediately have to lop off all the people that are not responsive to direct response type offers. So
how do you know, so that's the sludge, right?
No.
Oh, no.
Let me make sure I make this really clear. So before you even start slicing and dicing and, okay, who's my hyper responsives, who's my responses, who are my average citizens and who's my sludge? Before you even start that, you have to consider there's a percentage of my market that will not respond to an internet offer no matter what I do, right? I'm just putting this out there because if there are 10,000 people in your market, there's thousands, there's a percentage of them that are immune to direct response type offers. So you got to cut those people out right away. The reason I'm presenting this is not for sort of, hey, this is an interesting theory. This is the guidelines for how you run your business. So if you think you have 10,000 prospects, know right away you don't. Okay. How many you really have? I don't know. Hard to say, but for safety's sake, cut it in half right there. Then when you've got that half, then figure out how many of these people are going to be hyper responsive. Around, maybe if you're lucky, 5%. How many people are going to be responsive? Maybe if you're lucky, 15, 20%. The rest are going to take work, money, and investment. Now, the way the consumer, and so smart entrepreneurs know this going in. And so here's how the consumer electronics industry deals with this or dealt with this. I don't even know. Do we have a consumer electronics industry anymore? I mean, radios are gone, VCRs are gone, stereos are gone. I mean, it's all gone. But in those days, if anybody old enough to remember when you could go and, you needed all these things. You needed a Walkman, you needed a stereo, you needed a car radio. The way that industry did it was when they came out with something new, they would charge the moon for it. Right? I believe the original VCRs, if I'm not mistaken, were $10,000.
Wow.
You might say, my God, that's insane. Why would you do that? Here's why you would do that. Because there are hyper-responsive people out there. They are into it, whatever that it is. They have money and they're buyers, and they will do things that normal people will not do. And
how do you not poison them later on? So like to get to the regular folks, you probably would have to go down in price maybe, or, strip out things out of the offer. But how do you not upset the hyper-responsives?
Well, I mean, did people have a revolution? Did the people that paid $10,000 for a VCR, and when would that have been? The late 70s? Did they start riots when you could get a VCR for $95? It's just the way of the world.
I guess same thing with like plasma TVs. They were like 10 grand flat screens for a while, and then they came down.
The first time I saw a plasma screen TV was 1982, and it was and it was in the home of Seward Johnson III, the heir to the Johnson & Johnson fortune. They were rare. And then if you had a sports bar and you wanted to be like the coolest kid on the block, you would do your arithmetic and say, well, gee, maybe I should spend that 10 grand on a plasma TV because I'll blow away all the other bars in town. I'll sell enough beer to pay for it, right? Okay. So that is how consumer electronics did it or does it. And that's how we have to do it too. We have to make as much as we can from those hyper-responsives on the front end. Why? Because we're going to need the money to sell to the average consumer in the niche, the average direct responsive consumer in the niche.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's how it's done. You come up. I mean, my recommendation is you start out with the Rolls-Royce, gold-plated Rolls-Royce version of things. There's a number of reasons to do that. Number one is it's attention catching. Even the lowest member of the marketplace will kind of sit up and take notice and go, wow, that's quite an expensive item. That must be an amazing version of this thing. But the second reason you do it is you need the money. You're going to need the money. It's not like, oh, party time. We sold hyper-responsives. We sold to our hyper-responsives at this big price. Now we can go to Aruba and party or whatever it is foolish people do when they make money. But you're creating a war chest so that you can go back and hit the hyper-responsives. So you can go back and hit the responsives who are going to take a bit more effort. They're going to be more expensive to acquire as customers. You're going to have to pay more to get them. The beauty of hyper-responsives is you pay pretty much nothing. I mean, you run an ad, you get some publicity out there, and they come to you, right?
Okay.
And so if we'll go, and by the way, so there's two things that could happen. One is you do that and you run an ad and you don't even get the hyper-responsives. Then you really got to go back to the drawing board. Either your ad was terrible or you don't understand the market or your offer is not appealing. In other words, pouring more money in when you're not getting some sign of life on the front end, and you're going to get that sign of life from your hyper-responsives, is a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, I remember asking Jonathan Mizell like 10 years ago about that. What if you run a campaign and you get nothing? And he said, yeah, well, it's, you got to go back to the drawing board because you have no information.
Yeah. I mean, you actually do have information that even, because of the law of large numbers, some hyper-responsives in your market saw those ads and they were so unmotivating that even the hyper-responsives didn't come out and knock on the door and see what you take a better look. So the dual function of hyper-responsives is A, to let you know when you have something that's alive, and 2, allow you to build a war chest because you're not spending much to reach them and they're willing to pay a premium price, and you should take advantage of the fact that hyper-responsives are willing to take a premium price. That builds your war chest to go back now to the market again and start nibbling away at your responsives. And again, they're going to cost more to acquire. And the same thing, hopefully there's going to be profit. And then with those profits, you then start the long, hard slog of selling to the larger market. That's how it goes.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean,
what about the sludge? Like, how big are they, and what are they like?
Sludge, by the way, what is the sludge? The sludge, and this is important to know too. The sludge are people who will never buy this thing, buy from you, buy from anybody, even though they're nominally in the market. It's just they're never going to buy. So this is how companies get killed, right? They run their ads, they get this gold rush of hyper responsive, Great. They pour their money back in. They keep advertising. Now the responsives come out of the woodwork after a few turns of the wheel. Hey, it's looking good. Now it starts to get harder because now you're marketing to regular consumers. At a certain point, you're going to run out of regular consumers and you're going to hit the sludge. You best recognize when you've hit the sludge, or all that money that you made selling to the responsives, and regular customers is going to go down the tubes.
Oh, wow. You watched this.
And I've seen it a million times. People just don't get it. I mean, do I name this company? I won't embarrass them. They had an amazing launch. Amazing. It was an 8-figure launch. A lot of it was in receivables, money they expected to get based on a continuity. But still, it was a hell of a launch. And I was talking to the guy, and I said, you realize this is the best day this business is ever going to have. Right now, now you got to hold on to the ones you got, and you've gotten the hyper responsives. They're in the door. Right now, it's going to be, if you're going to be around for the long run, and maybe not. Maybe you don't want to or need to be around for the long run. Maybe you just want to cream the market by selling to the responsives and hyper responsives, and go merrily down the road. But which is totally legitimate, unless you have service that you're supposed to be serving these people on an ongoing basis, then it's illegitimate. But if you're not in that situation, that's one way to look at this too. But if you want to have a business, and a business means having customers, and you want a broad customer base, ideally, then you have to think about, okay, how do I reach beyond? Or, not. You decide, hey, I'm only going to offer premium services / premium products to premium customers, which are by definition your hyper responsive and responsive people. The ones that have the biggest motivation, they care the most, and they have the most resources. This is not at all a bad model for people who are small operators and want to stay small operators, because obviously the more customers you're serving, the more infrastructure you have to have, and that gets expensive. So yeah, that's my vision on this. But I've seen this happen so many times. And even
what percentage would you guess of the sludge of the whole market?
At least 50%.
Wow.
So, and the reason, and it's so important to know this, because again, a lot of people get stars in their eyes and goes, oh my God, this market, how many left-handed pastry chefs are there? How many people who like to ride horses backwards are there? I mean, I'm just making things up. And you think that total number represents your market. It doesn't at all. They're just people.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what do you do if you have so how hard do you have to market to exhaust the hyper responsives, the responsives, and then the average person to get to the sludge? Is it only for really aggressive marketers or regular businesses?
You'll kind of know where you are at each phase, because your cost of lead is going to start, your cost of sale and cost of lead is going to start low, and then it's going to get progressively higher. And then, it's a feel. I wish I had a formula or an algorithm or an AI program or an equation to use. It's just kind of a feel. You kind of say, wow, we kind of running out of gas here. We're advertising and we're not getting new people, which leads us to a really important thing. And you and I were talking about this earlier before the recording started. The real game here is to figure out how to extract as much revenue as you can by offering, obviously by offering services, wide variety of services and products and stuff to the people that end up in your pool, because getting people to become customers is the hardest part of business, right?
Yep.
I'm trying to think of the famous guy, Peter Drucker. Somebody asked him, what is business? And business, he said, is innovation, which I agree. If you can't just do the same thing that everybody else is doing. It's ridiculous. That's like, who needs you then, right? But he said the other function of business is to create customers. And what is a customer? It has the word custom built into it. It's people who have a custom of buying things from you on an ongoing basis. So that's a whole other dimension of this, which is really important. If you're going into any business, try to find something where you're going to have a steady cash flow. Now, the plumber deals with that by the fact that people's pipes are going to be busting all over the place all the time. So he doesn't really have to worry about that. But if you've got any other kind of a market that's different than that, but even a plumber, if he wanted to stabilize his cash flow, he could sell, plumbing insurance. Hey, give me $49 a month and I'll come and do an, annual investigation or inspection of your plumbing and once a year. And you also have me on pager, which means if we have any kind of a problem, 24 hours a day, I'm going to respond and be there within an hour. That's your policy. Check this out. The great opportunity for money in the 90s, late 90s and the 2000s up to, I don't know, relatively recently was selling information on the internet. I think the great opportunity now is selling personal services. And I'll give you an example of that because we just have so few. You probably experienced this where you live. I know I'm experiencing it here and I hear about it everywhere. You can't get people that can do anything anymore. You can't find electricians. You can't find anything. Yep. So this is how extreme it can get. So out in the Hamptons, right? You're a New Yorker. The Hamptons is sort of the mythical place where hedge fund managers go and they have their $20 million summer houses. And well, the high-end hairdressers, you have to contract with them on retainer. Yeah, because they're in such short supply. And if you're the wife of a hedge fund manager, you can't go to Marge at some random beauty parlor. You got to have the best of the best of the best, right? And those people, there aren't a lot of them, and they're super busy, and they just put up the attitude that, well, if you want to be on my customer list, that's $1,000 a month. And you may say, wow, Ken, it's crazy. Well, if your husband's bringing in, $200 million a year and giving you an allowance of $1 million a week or whatever, I mean, there's craziness out there. But the point is, there's an example of a mundane business where people are able to create a dependable, permanent, ongoing cash flow. So in addition to this, the understanding that there's hyper responsive and normal customers, and you're going to have to pay ever escalating amounts of money to get those new people into the boat. You then have the other part of this, and it's essential, is you have to be thinking about, okay, once they're in the boat, then what? Because the worst business in the world would be a business where you're constantly advertising to get customers. You get the customer, you have your income event, and then you're done, and then you're on the next one, the next one, and the next. That is a definition of a hamster wheel. And it's a hamster wheel if you're in a limited kind of a market, and most are, a hamster wheel where you will eventually run out. You will have sold. Everybody will have bought something from you. And if you don't have a way to keep them continuing, you don't have reasons for them, you don't have offers that make sense for them to continue with you, you will burn through your hyper responsives, you'll burn through your responsives, you'll take all your money and go through your average citizens, you'll hit the sludge, and then you have no one else to sell to. I mean, not literally, there'll still be a handful of people, but you've hit them, you've gotten the market, you've harvested the marketplace, Yeah,
it seems like My Pillow, that's what's happened to, because they used to have their pillows like $100 each, and then now they're like 20 or 30 for two of them, and then they did slippers and sheets, and I guess you could see it probably in real time. They run out of people to sell their pillows to, so they have to sell other stuff.
Exactly. So they're selling other stuff for two reasons. One, to bring in maybe new people from a new direction. Maybe somebody doesn't need a pillow, but they like I thought I saw them selling sheets. Were they selling
Egyptian cotton sheets?
Right. But they need sheets, so they'll buy sheets. So that's a new way to get somebody in. It's also a way to monetize the people that are already in their customer list. But you can see he's a classic example. His business is probably doing fine, but believe me, there's a lot of juggling behind the scenes. And, how many pillows can you sell?
Yeah, that's tough.
There's only so
I can see this to be a big problem because, as you have success in the market, you get used to a level of business and you staff up. And, then when the things start not to work, you're not going to catch it necessarily right off the bat. So you're going to start to suffer and then you run out of resources and then you have to scale back. And the whole thing I see could be like a downward spiral.
This is why you need to know this going in and why you need to be lean and mean forever. Like there's no point at which you start popping the champagne corks, in my opinion. I've been doing this a long time and I don't live a dour life. I have a lot of fun and everything, but I don't. And it's hard. The first time you have a big success, you think you're a genius, you think you're the golden boy of the ages, and it's just going to be smooth, easy sailing forever. There's no business like that, right? So when you have the big success, put that money aside because you may need it to grow and expand. But yeah, you could easily. I run into so many people who think they need all kinds of stuff they don't need. I've never had an office. I'm in a direct response business, so I don't need one. I don't see clients. I don't have a retail store. But there are even people who are in my kind of business that have offices and they have like multiple assistants. And, if you pencil and paper it out and you need those people to actually serve the people who are giving you money on a regular basis, well, that's one thing. But if you're just sort of selling stuff and you think you need to have all the accoutrements of success around you, a walnut paneled office, and it's not a good way to go.
How do you know when someone has bought enough from you where they'll pretty much buy anything you put out? Like, how do you identify that?
When they buy whatever you put out, you'll find out by just you'll put some for instance. Well, I don't know how many businesses do this. I do know that every time I ask, I very, very, very rarely get an answer. I don't know many people that can push a button and get a printout of their top 100 customers by spend.
Oh, they should be able to, yeah.
I mean, yeah, but they don't know. And that is a very fatal flaw. Right? You should know who your top buyers are, especially if you have something that is an ongoing kind of thing, because, one of my I only have 3 laws of business. One of them is don't give people a reason to do business elsewhere. Well, neglect and taking people for granted is a great way. It's a great reason for someone to take their business elsewhere.
Yeah. I've seen in a lot of, this is more big business. I don't know, when they get big, they start to get abusive. Microsoft did this, Google does this. I mean, all these companies, when they get bigger, they just start to be just mean to the customers and just brutalize them. It's crazy. I don't get it.
When you have a monopoly position, I mean, even the hairdressers in East Hampton, I mean, can you imagine demanding that somebody give you $1,000 a month just to be accessible? It's not like you're getting any services. It's just like, okay, now you can come into my salon. Otherwise, you can't even walk through the door, right? I mean, that on one level, that's pretty abusive, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, if the government has granted you a monolithic monopoly position in a marketplace, yeah, you can get away with a lot of stuff.
I guess human nature, that's why these businesses act like that, because they can.
Yeah. I mean, the spirit of business, I think, ultimately is service. Service with the ability to do arithmetic. And it's easy to lose track of that once you have the machine running. In the case of Microsoft, everybody had to buy their software because they control the operating system. And Google, pretty much everybody's got to do business with them one way or another because they have a monopoly position in search. So then the connection between service, and when there's no competition, if you want to be abusive to your customers, great. But if there are other choices people have, you just lost your customer and you'll probably lose your business eventually. But in a monopoly like Amazon or like Google doesn't have to worry about that too much.
Okay. So what happens if you're in business and again, you feel like you've burned through most of the accessible people in it? How do you pivot and stay alive? What have you seen people do?
You got to understand who those people are who gave you money in the first place and what else is it that they need, and then you have to go out and figure out how to give it to them at a profit.
Well, I guess the hyper responsives would actually be amenable to you and probably like the attention of you sitting down with them and talking and saying, hey, you bought this, what are other dreams you have in this industry, or what are the things that you want that you really, really would like, that the big problems you have.
Yeah, and a lot of it also is talking to your customers is always a good idea.
What happens if you're surveying your customers? Like Ryan Levesque always talks about that. Who's answering? Is it the same type of people that are answering, the hyper-responsive relatives, or like what do you think you're getting?
Clearly, they're responsive people, and they might just be people who are responsive to answering surveys. They may be non-customers, We, in the very early days of the System Seminar 2002, after I'd already been teaching internet marketing for 9 years, we did temporarily have a surveying piece in our system. And we had a guy whose name I will not mention, and he had a little survey program. And I don't know, it was kind of bullshit. I mean, if you are so unaware of the people, of the market that you're selling to, that you have to ask them what they want via automated survey, via impersonal survey. It's one thing to be out and about and talking with people, listening to people, and reading discussion boards, and just keeping your nose to the wind. But you buy something from, you stay at a Marriott, right? And then the next day they send you a survey. It's like, really, how useful is that really? I mean, that's already corporatization. I think the idea that surveys are going to give you the whole thing or give you a large piece of it is frankly snake oil. It sounds right, like it's right. It creates a profit event for the person selling the idea and the services related to it. But we're doing it. And to me, it's a second tier, third tier sideshow thing. The main thing you want to know is who the heck are your customers? Where are they hanging out? What media are they consuming? What are they buying? What's hot right now? What used to be hot and isn't? I mean, there's 1,000,001 questions that you can find out much better on your own. Take shoe leather, but without surveying. And the problem with surveying is you don't do any of the real work that needs to be done. This is why the surveying thing is so popular. You don't do any of the real work that needs to be done, any of the real shoe leather research. You don't do any thinking. You don't use any imagination. You run a survey. Now you have your little survey answers, and you think you've got something. And I think you've got something, but not enough to base I wouldn't base my time, money, and sweat and effort on those kind of surveys.
Like I've heard a lot about Net Promoter Score, but that's like, oh, would you recommend this or not? But that doesn't really tell you. So what if you said to your customers on a periodic basis, what do you like about the service or whatever product we offer you, and what don't you like, or what do you think needs improving? Do you think that that approach over and over again, asking.
I think if it's organic, if you set up a collaborative atmosphere with your customers from the day one, I think is a really, really good idea, so that you're doing it on a regular basis. And maybe instead of barraging them with, a 20 questions survey, you just, hey, it's the question of the month. We're curious. What do you think about this? Like, it can even be silly. It doesn't have to be profound every month. You could ask, hey guys, what do you think about Taylor Swift? I don't know. It's like there's a flow. You get a flow going. Every month we ask our customers different questions. You might say, hey, maybe you want to suggest questions that we could ask. If we use your question, we'll give you a free whatever, right? So you have customers submitting questions, which you may or may not use. You come up with your own questions, but there's now a natural relationship where you are actively engaged with the customer, not this sort of fake corporate thing like, which would you prefer?
You strongly agree, you strongly disagree.
Yeah, it's like that's classic college business BS, in my opinion. And it sounds good. It's something that mediocre people can execute on and think they're doing something. But, the better way is to, from day one, let your customers know, hey, we're all ears. We can make this better. Let us know. By the way, long before I would add a surveying piece, I would make sure my customer service piece is in fine fiddle. I wouldn't be, hey, get a ticket and wait 3 weeks for some numbskull to not answer your question. If I were to invest money, that's a place where I would invest money. And if you want to know what your customers are thinking, well, there you are. You're solving their problem for them. You're understanding their problem. Yeah. It may be a problem with your product that you're not even aware of, the way you pitched it or the way you marketed it, the way you packaged it, or the way you...
Well, a lot of times when I give feedback, that I stop for the most part because, the companies are like, oh, thanks for your feedback. And they do nothing. So it makes me even angrier. I didn't even want to deal with them when they're like that. It's like, what's the point of saying anything? Because they just never fix anything or never change anything. It's like, forget it,
Especially when it's, something patently, wrong, something broken, something that doesn't work.
So you might laugh at this. I remember I used Salesforce.com or Salesforce years ago. And they were terrible. And I remember the guy that sold me into it, and this guy, Alex Borden, and they would keep switching reps on me every few months. And they lock you into a contract. So I would tell the reps, like, don't ever contact me. I despise your company. I tell everyone I know that I despise your company and not to do business with you. And the second I don't have to do business with you, I'm gone. And they'd be like, okay.
Yeah.
I literally told them because they were so bad.
Yeah,
exactly what I did.
I completely do not understand the existence and success of Salesforce. They are a garbage company run by a garbage guy, and but yet they persist. They got into their market, which is mostly corporate people, and some corporate manager got the idea that we needed this kind of software, and Salesforce appears to be the safe brand to buy because everyone's buying it, and I guess that's how they're surviving.
Yeah.
But I've heard nothing but bad stuff about them, especially like any kind of interaction with their reps and their agents. But we have to remember a huge amount of business in this country is done by bureaucrats, whether they're literal government bureaucrats or they're bureaucratic-minded people working for large companies. And their tolerance for crap is very high because they don't really care, Whereas you and I, we're running businesses. We got to make payrolls. We got to go out and get that revenue to keep it going. If we're not getting served, if the tool's no good, if the rep is a jackass, we take it personally. But exactly. Joe Blow working for the Ulster County Department of whatever, who needs to keep track of whatever, he's not paying for it, and it works good enough, and he probably doesn't use it anyway, but he thought it was a good idea. I wonder what percentage of people what percentage of institutions that are paying Salesforce every month for services actually even use them. It just becomes a line item on the budget and no one takes it off.
Okay. So any other, like you said, I don't know, how many markets do you think you've been inside of and seen the inside of, through consulting clients? And what are some commonalities you see, if you haven't mentioned them all, on how people go wrong or go right?
Well, if you include, there's a limit to how many businesses I can be in, but I've been in personally, let me just see, 1, 2, these are like, full-blown enterprises. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, at least 6 different, businesses that I have founded and operated myself. So 6. But because of my role as an advisor and educator, it's got to be hundreds, and I mean getting under the hood, just seeing everything, all their numbers, all their joys and sorrows and triumphs, so it's a lot. And, I think you got to be completely obsessed with your marketplace. You got to be obsessed with your customers. You got to have their interests at heart. You have to understand arithmetic. We're not involved in charity. We're involved in making a profit. You have to be continuously updating yourself and innovating. You have to be communicating constantly with your people. And I've just made a long list of things that most people can't be bothered to do. They think they're going to, come up with a product, come up with an ad, buy some ads, and they're going to have a business. And it's not that way at all. You're basically getting into a long-term relationship with a whole mess of people. And, that's where the money comes from ultimately.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I guess last thing. So what are some things on this list that people need to do besides the basics if they have a hope of succeeding?
Well, I think cover your basics and cover them well. This is the problem. Not knowing what the basics are and not covering them. And, good product obvious. Follow up with anybody that's ever inquired with you. Don't get a lead and then not follow up on it. That's the most common thing in the world. Be responsive to people that have issues. Learn from them. I mean, there are cranks out there, and there's nothing you can do to make them happy, but there are people that have legitimate observations about ways you can do things better. Listen to them. Customer service is a great way to get to know what's happening with your products. Look for ways to make your current customer base more valuable to you by coming up with additional services that you can offer them. This is really important.
Okay. Well, very good.
All right.
And thanks again for doing this. It's always excellent to talk to you, so I appreciate you coming again.
Likewise, I hope this was helpful.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.